All right, man. One of the movies that I didn't know necessarily going into haunt season, but I definitely found over the course of haunt season was a Comedy Central film that was a ton of fun. And I'm talking about Cursed Friends, which just has like an all-star cast of Comedy Central favorites and comedians that have appeared like on Saturday Night Live to like TLC, all kinds of stuff. I'm talking like Nicole Richie, um, Kathy Griffin, Andrew Lewis Codwell. You got little cameos all the way from like Joey Fatone to Rob Riggle. Will Arnett is a big piece of this, both on screen and off screen. But of course, I'm always stoked to have composers come on because music is always such a essential part to this, and this thing is a fun score to listen to because it's like a comedic horror film, so you kind of get elements of both horror and comedy within
Right.
the thing. And I have composer Corey Wallace with us, who was the artist who composed the soundtrack for this movie. And congratulations, man! It's a dope one.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So how was it like this job came to you? Did you get approached or did you hear about them like trying to find someone and you came across the script and knew that this would be a fun project? How did this thing find you?
Well, my manager, Peter Hackman of Different Direction Management, he was the one who actually found this project. I believe it was on Production Weekly, and found that they were shooting over the summer. He approached them, the producers, just the kind of middle of July, just as they were wrapping up production, a very quick summer production, and it just kind of happened to be the right place, the right time. They were like a lot of productions, they weren't really looking for composers early. They were waiting until they got the thing shot, got it in the can, so to speak, before going to find a composer. And my manager just approached them at the right time, and when they were wrapping a production, and I met with them. I did a short demo, and they really liked my demo, so we were kind of off and running from there.
Right on, man. And so, did you get to compose this thing as it went? Like, were they sending you any kind of like daily shots or anything, or were they pretty much completely done filming and then they were sending you kind of drafts of the final cut, so to speak?
Well, my first of all, my demo scene, I only saw this one scene out of context. I didn't get a chance to read the script or see a full cut. They just sent me this one scene, and they told me about the movie. So I did get a good impression of what the film was going to be like. Not a full picture, um, but I did get a kind of a sense of the feel and the comedic timing from that one scene. And in my demo, I worked out what I planned would be like a main theme for the movie if I were to get the job. So that was a big step. Once I did get the job, having that kind of foundation of, okay, this is going to be the sound, the style, the theme, and that was a really good head start. But no, I didn't get to see any of that stuff as they went along. They really just kind of ended shooting at the end of July, and I got a rough cut or a editor's cut, kind of mid August, and then a final cut at the beginning of September. So it was a really quick turnaround for all departments. And then I had to turn over the score mid September. So I thought I might have 6 weeks to score it, but I really only had four, and only two of those with a final cut. So it was a pretty quick one.
That's a pretty intense thing, man.
Yeah, it's a very stark contrast to the film I did earlier this year called Supercell, directed by my friend Jamie Winterstern, who I met at USC 13 years ago, and we started working on that score uh, before the script was even done, before they had shot even a frame, and then they did like a test shot a test shoot a year before the real shoot, and I did like a score to that where I wrote the main theme about a year in advance. And then, like you said, I did actually see dailies and then rough cuts and fine cuts, and I must have seen every cut of that film as we narrowed it down to the final version. But we worked on that for a total of like 2.5 years, on and off, as opposed to the four. That's my cat moving the microphone stand here. Sorry,
I can
but
feel, I can feel that we're kind of like in the middle of that same deal with independent film. We made a short right out of film school, and it did rather well, and it won a bunch of awards. And we immediately went into like that film is 12 minutes long, so we said that the next one we wanted to do was 35, and then COVID happened.
mm-hmm.
This thing has been like a 2.5 year project just to get this 35-minute film done. So I can imagine that over the last couple of years that anything could have happened to make a film that um, may have been a year project or something extended. So the fact that you guys completed the film is a major accomplishment.
Absolutely.
And then you roll over from that to where that seems like your guys is like you and your friends kind of like um, coming together, like almost thesis type project, if you will. Like you guys seem like that was like a major thing that you guys had wanted to do together, which is pretty rad. Then you get to like roll over, and now you're doing this project with all these like all-star comedians, which is super rad. Um, that scene that you said you got sent, were
Mm-hmm.
any, can you even say were any of the comedians that are like all-stars in the scene that you got
Yep.
to see?
Yeah. So it was just the scene with Jessica Lowe and Ken Marino, and not knowing much more about the film other than the premise, it got me pretty stoked about the possibility of doing this film because I've been watching Ken Marino for 20 years, and he's just talk about an all-star comedian. He's hilarious. He's always been hilarious, and I got really excited about the potential of him being in a movie that I'd be working on. As you alluded to earlier, it turns out he is mostly just in that one scene, as are many of the other appearances from different comedians. They have their kind of cameo scene, and then it moves on and it follows these four main characters. But even Jessica Lowe, who I've seen in Minx and in Blended, she played off Kevin Nealon in Blended like hilariously. She's a great improviser, and she might not be the household name of Will Arnett or Rob Riggle, but she held her own for sure in this movie.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, she, it really was. It felt like this I don't know. It felt like a Comedy Central all-star type of a thing. And they put them all together to do like this goofball comedy. Um the fact that it came out during Halloween is very rad. The fact that it was a 2.5 week final cut to have it come out during Halloween is like, I mean, that's even more pressure because now you have the idea. Did you know that that's what they were shooting for, was like a
Yep.
Halloween release? So
Yep.
that has
When
to a
Yeah,
little.
when I met with producer Kelly Knight at the end of July, early August, that's what she was very upfront about that. She said, we need the person who's going to jump on board to move really quickly through this. And luckily, I have a lot of experience in television, in addition to feature film scoring. So it's not uncommon to do 10, 20, or even 30 minutes of music a week in television. So it's knowing how to approach something when you have that kind of fast turnaround. Something I'm used to, fortunately, and was able to take that kind of mentality and apply it to the feature film. It's really all about efficiency in the when you're trying to get a feature film done that fast. I wrote that main theme, like I said, during the demo phase, and then the first thing I did when I got the full cut is I went through it and took that main theme and I started placing it throughout the film. And I looked for opportunities dramatically where this theme would be appropriate. And so taking, one melody and arranging it into 5, 6, 7 different cues, different scenes, really got me going pretty quickly. And then from there, it was about finding other like threads and sub themes that I could write one cue and then take that idea and put it in another scene and rearrange it and just make sure that kind of the whole thing fit together like that.
The score, like you mentioned, I can tell that you kind of have done placement of that main theme and variations of throughout it. Was there any kind of inspiration that you had pulled from, or did you just kind of all original based on what you were watching?
You mean inspiration for the theme or the sound of the score?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, given the fast turnaround, it doesn't leave a lot of time for experimentation and trial and error. You have to, fall back on experience and that bag of tricks, as composers like to call it. I've mentioned this before in other places, but John Kaysen, the editor who did the temp score, he did a great job with the temp. It was a really solid foundation of like this style, this sound, this energy, this pace is working well in the scene. So when, especially with a fast turnaround, the first thing, the other first thing I do, what I said, with the main theme, placing it around, that might be the first thing. But when approaching a scene and looking at the temp, if the temp is working, I take an idea from the temp, like what is working about this? Is it the mood? Is it the tempo, the pacing? And then just taking a quick idea from the temp music, saying, oh, this is working, and now I'm going to put that into my own piece, into something that fits in our sound, in our style for this story. And whether it's arrangement of the main theme or something else, it's usually drawing some kind of inspiration from the temp, or even that anti-inspiration. There was a few cues that didn't work so great. A lot of the dramatic and emotional cues did not fit right, and we had to find something that kind of was in that fun, tongue-in-cheek vibe, but also kind of gave the emotional or dramatic need of a particular scene without making it sound too serious or without making it sound too kind of young adult. And so, going in the opposite direction of the temp music in that case worked really well. But, you need 2 points to make a line. So taking the temp music on one hand and then either going in that direction or going in the opposite direction is always a good place to start.
The film having that kind of a deadline, and you mentioned that your experience in TV, which one do you prefer? Do you prefer, because some people would prefer to work under that kind of like deadline, like pressure type of a thing? Do you prefer that kind of work pace, or do you prefer a normal like motion picture 6 week type of a thing?
I'd argue that even 6 weeks is kind of fast. The traditional model, which most companies don't even follow anymore, is a 12-week model, which is actually what we ended up having on Supercell at the end, which felt like a luxury. I'm lucky to get 8 weeks sometimes, and a lot of times you're right, 6 weeks is pretty common. I've done several films in only 4 weeks, in addition to Cursed Friends, and it's not that there's pros and cons to both. What I like about the deadline approach is that it forces me to remove that nagging pest in my brain that is either too critical or not quite sure. There's too much doubt in that sector of the brain. And sometimes that can lead to great things when there's time to be really critical and picky and try one thing and think about it for a few days or a week or a month and then come back to it. Sometimes really great things can come out of that process. But there is something nice about okay, this needs to be done. What's the way I can get it done? Oh, this is my first idea. I'm going to go with that idea. and then I'm just explore it from there and do it quickly. Um, you know, it's a little hit or miss when you do it like that, but I think at this point in my career, I'm able to get something good done fast. You know, maybe it's not my greatest work, maybe it's not the greatest work that's been ever been done, but I know it's going to be good and work for the movie.
Hmm. Are you a horror movie fan, or was this a you kind of like got this one presented to you more because of the comedic value?
Um, the horror comedy subgenre in particular is something that I really like because I do have both a lot of background in horror as well as family friendly entertainment and animation and comedy. So blending the two is a real comfort zone for me. I'd say I have more experience in horror, and I do like horror a lot. It was kind of what makes the difference between like a real serious horror movie where you're trying to scare people and a horror comedy. It's a very fine line, but one that has a distinct specificity to the approach where it is that tongue-in-cheek quality that I touched on before. Just always thinking about what's going to be fun, and even like really intense and scary music can be fun if you push it kind of just one step maybe too far. When you dial it up to 11, I feel like it stops being scary and starts being more fun. Um, the temp music used a lot of Danny Elfman in particular, and a lot of the Frighteners score,
Mhm.
which is a really good example of like that zany, fun quality, but at the same time intense and somewhat scary. And that was a really good model for us here.
Yeah, that's a cool reference point. The Frighteners, um, or even Elfman, I can, now that you say that, like just kind of replaying some of it in my head, that definitely rings home. That's pretty cool, man. Those are names that I don't think get enough attention, enough love. And The Frighteners is one of those movies that people I think forget how good it actually was. Like
Yeah.
that's like a movie kind of like the original Stephen King's Pet Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
In that kind of like cult horror type vibe that you forget how scary that back in the day that they actually were. But The Frighteners was like that horror comedy line that um really fits almost, kind of with Cursed Friends. I would say Cursed Friends has got a little bit more straight comedy versus like The
Oh,
Frighteners
absolutely.
dark comedy, but
I mean, I don't think there is a movie out there that's like Cursed Friends. Like in terms of being a straight up comedy that also it's kind of takes place in a horror movie. It's a but it is a comedy. I wouldn't even call it a horror movie necessarily. I think fans of comedy versus fans of horror would like it more, because there's not a ton in it that is meant to be straight up scary. It's definitely always meant to be kind of fun, and even during the scares, it's not really a parody and it's not really a satire, but it does kind of play on horror movie tropes and traditions in, and then puts this comedy structure on top of it, lets the comedians improvise and riff on the situation. So it's quite hilarious. I think in general, to answer your earlier question, I like horror movies, but I particularly like horror movies that approach it with some kind of sense of fun. I'm talking like Sam Raimi, Evil Dead's, Drag Me to Hell, Scream, and The Faculty, Final Destination. Those movies that take the horror movie and put a sense of fun on top of it. I think I get a little too scared at things that are really scary. And it's definitely better to have a little more fun for me.
it's interesting that some of those names that you just said, I know some of them for sure have kind of iconic soundtracks to them. Scream had a really iconic soundtrack that it was almost like a record scratch, kind of cut in, and then um that just like ghost face theme, that slow methodical, but it was almost like a slow methodical rock metal theme.
Hmm.
um that was super iconic from when it came out. I was gonna say that movie was like 99-ish, so I was graduating junior high school. So that was like one of the first ones my parents let me watch like in the movie theater. The movie scared the hell out of me. I don't
Hmm.
And it was like the resurgence of the slasher, and then
Right.
it really was like a powerful soundtrack. And um you mentioned the Frighteners. That one, if you like start that movie, like the main theme of the Frighteners is like an iconic
Hmm.
song in itself. Like if you ever get like one of those Halloween playlists on Apple Music, like and it's just like the Halloween theme music, and it's like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and yada yada yada. The Frighteners is always usually on that.
Oh yeah.
So it's included in like the top 10 movie themes. Um, when you get that kind of project put in front of you, your process, how many like times would you say that you go over the film? Like how many drafts of a soundtrack would you say you end up doing before you feel good enough to say you're completely done?
Oh, well, that of course has a give and take with the director or producers or studios, however many layers of approvals you need, I think for me, my most comfortable zone is about 3 drafts. I'm very happy with something after I've been able to revisit it, for a third time. Every time I go back to a queue, I open it up, I'll get new ideas. I'll get um, maybe some little sound or some little layer, a little thing I can add to it that I think will make it better. Um, you know, the thing that we talked about scoring really fast, for TV or for a movie schedule like this. And a lot of times getting something done real fast there's a certain amount of repetition and a certain amount of just playing quickly to the movie, just like the first idea that comes out of your head and just going with that. But the what I prefer to do is have that second, that third or more draft to really polish it to that's where the craft I think comes in, the composition craft. I think that initial idea from your brain that says this is what will make this scene work, that'll make this cue work. I think that is a perfectly valid place to start, but it is that kind of intellectual. I'm sorry, I should say that visceral place, that primitive, just guttural reaction to it. That's a great place to start. But then the intellectual, maybe academic side of me that I can craft it and mold it into something a little bit better, a little bit more polished.
Mm.
That's where that second and third draft come into play. We didn't get all that time on Chris Friends. It was mostly of version one draft with some version two, version one score with some version twos.
Mm.
But to answer your question, yeah, 3 drafts, maybe 4 or 5, really polish it up.
That's interesting way to look at it, that you just said the to polish it up, going to the educational side of things. I think that's a really good way of saying kind of the advantage of going to school where maybe you don't necessarily need to go to like quote film school or music school to be successful in composing. There are people who I'm sure out there can compose music and do it very well, who have never touched school. However,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to school, you may be aware of ways to make your work that much better. And therein lies, like you said, like the draft 4 and 5, where you're laying down stuff to the musical tracks that someone who didn't go to school may not even really know about, and thus yours is going to uh in theory sound just that much better by having known those tricks of the trade, so to speak.
In
That
theory.
yeah.
But
So
for anybody listening, you did touch on something important, is that you definitely don't need an academic background to write music, to be musical. If it's either inside of you or it isn't. If you hear music in your head, and then you can be a composer, you can be a music producer if you hear it in your head. Knowing how to get it out, that's the step one of the craft for sure. And that might take some kind of training, maybe academic training. I think the most important thing that academic training gives you is that analytical knowledge. And that's what really that second, third, and fourth draft is doing. It's taking a step back and looking at something with an analytical brain, and not with necessarily that initial musical thought. And sometimes, like you said, you can pull out, an academic trick, for lack of a better term, that might help make this better.
the thing too that you kind of touched on there was that hearing music in your head. It's interesting that you say it that way, because I definitely think that um for me at least, having after completed film school, now everything is definitely like in shots, like everything you see as in like setting up camera shots. And so it's kind of wild that you as a film composer, you would say that like you're just kind of like constantly hearing like a score to life. Is that kind of how you would say it?
That's one way to say it. I definitely record my thoughts like in life. Before the cell phone recorder, I had a tape recorder. So if I'm in the car, if I'm walking down the street and I just get an idea, I can hum it in and file it away for later. So, you never know when inspiration is going to strike, and keeping track of it is definitely a good idea. But yeah, I mean, whether it's in life or when you're looking at a blank page, or a movie, and just listening in your head, and hearing music. If you can do that, you can be a composer. And then that's the starting block for everybody.
Mhm.
No matter who you are, a beginner or the greatest composer ever exists. It always starts blank, and just listen. And what do you hear? What do you want? What do you want to do for this?
You mentioned some of your favorite horror movies earlier as just like a horror movie fan, but like as a horror movie like composer, or horror movie kind of composer fan, music fan,
Mm-hmm.
is there a horror movie theme that you would call your favorite?
Horror movie theme.
Yeah.
Man, I haven't really thought about that, to tell you the truth. Of what I mentioned, the Drag Me to Hell is definitely one of my favorites. I love that score. And it's been noted elsewhere that my music in Cursed Friends is possibly influenced by that, and I can almost guarantee that it definitely is influenced by that score, Drag Me to Hell, and the great Christopher Young. um, Marco Beltrami, not necessarily a theme in particular, but his body of work was extremely influential to me in that late 90s period. When I went to college in 2001, it was, I studied what's most conservatory style composition programs would teach as 20th century music. A combination of late romantic period music and post tonality 20th century like serialism and atonal music, aleatoric music. That kind of academic environment is a certain style, I would say, of composition. And I really enjoyed that at the time. Not really focus. I didn't focus on melody like I do a lot now, but I wondered if there was a place for me in Hollywood. I loved film music, and I loved that certain style of orchestral writing in particular. And I was like, well, I don't know if I can be part of the Hollywood scene if I'm going to be writing this style of music. Um, but then I really got into the work of Marco Beltrami, from Scream to The Faculty, Hellboy, iRobot. I heard a style that really resonated with what I was doing at the time. And I thought, if he can do it, then there's a place for me in Hollywood too.
Right on, man. That's really cool to kind of see you follow in your idol's footsteps, so to speak, and just kind of, you know, follow the inspiration and then become a composer yourself. That's really, really cool to see. Cursed Friends is really dope. I know I watched it on our Hulu. It's through Comedy Central. So if you have just Comedy Central on your cable, you may be able to like catch it on demand or just like throughout their programming. But it is definitely worth checking out while it's available. And where can everybody kind of keep tabs on you, man? Like to see what you have coming down next and follow what you got going on.
Well, there's my website, www.coreywallace.com. And I've been much more active in Instagram these days, which is composer.corey, or is it corey.composer? I should really know that, but it's one of the two. Let me see if I can check on that real quick. But I'm always posting stuff there.
Right on. And we will, at the worst case, we will tag you on Instagram so they'll see the whatever account it actually is.
I just checked. It is corey.composer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. But man, thank you again and congratulations on the film. It is a lot of fun to check out, and make sure everybody that you check out Cursed Friends and give Corey's musical work a listen, man.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. And thanks for watching and digging what we did on it.
Very cool.